I'm Lily, and I'm 23. Since I was a little child, photography has been my love. When I was 10 years old and obtained my first disposable camera, I snapped shots of everything, including bugs, clouds, and my feet. As a professional photographer now, I take pictures for weddings, aspiring models, and pretty much anybody else who wants good pictures. I recently spent $3,500 on a professional camera. Although it was a significant expenditure, it was well worth it. When my parents learnt how much I spent, they almost suffered a stroke. "You wasted $3,000 on a camera?" Mom's hands had gone up in frustration. "Lily, you must get a legitimate job. Something dependable with benefits in an office." Dad gave a nod. "Jessica, your cousin, recently started working at that downtown insurance business. They have dental care. I wanted to let them know that I do make a nice living, enough to cover their monthly mortgage, but I refrained from saying so. That's my family's problem. My career has never been taken seriously by them. I didn't intend to live with my parents, but I still do. I was eager to have my own house after completing my studies at the nearby community college. However, they persuaded me to stay. Mom had been unemployed for months after losing her job at the bank. I jumped in to rescue them since they were drowning in payments. 2 years have passed since then. Eventually, Mom obtained another employment, but her pay is insufficient to pay for groceries. I continued to make mortgage payments. We also share a home with my younger sister, Amy. She is currently enrolled in her second year at Westfield College, a private institution that our parents managed to finance. There has always been tension in our relationship. Amy was the princess who could do no wrong, the golden kid, as a child. I received a B+ on a maths test when I was 10 and Amy was 5. Dad hardly gave it a glance before inquiring as to why it wasn't an A. They took Amy out for ice cream to lift her spirits after she brought home a C the same day. This trend persisted until maturity. Amy never forgets that my parents covered her tuition at Westfield College. Whenever her pals were around, she would inquire, "How's the community college crowd, Lily? Must be nice to save all that money on education." I try not to listen to what she says. In any case, I'm too busy for family drama. I seldom stay at home since I work at my tiny studio downtown and go for outdoor shots. Typically, I arrive late at night, reheat whatever is in the refrigerator, and then collapse. However, I enjoy my busy schedule and seeing how I develop as a photographer with every assignment. I arrived home at 9 p.m. one early summer evening following an especially demanding engagement shoot. The house was unusually quiet. Normally, the TV would be blaring one of Dad's sports games or Amy's reality shows. Instead, I found our dining table set with the good china, the stuff Mom only breaks out for Thanksgiving. "There she is," Dad announced as I walked in, camera bag slung over my shoulder. Mom, Dad, and Amy were seated at the table, looking expectantly at me. I immediately felt suspicious. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my equipment down carefully. "We're celebrating," Mom beamed. Amy finished her sophomore year with a 3.8 GPA. I nodded, trying to remember if they'd ever celebrated any of my academic achievements. They hadn't. "That's great," I said flatly. "Congrats, Amy." Amy smirked. "Thanks, sis." Dad cleared his throat. "We think Amy deserves a special gift for working so hard." I tensed up. Whenever my parents started talking about special gifts for Amy, it usually involved my wallet. Amy jumped in, unable to contain herself. "My friends are going to Florida in 2 weeks for a trip, and I want to go with them." All three of them stared at me, the expectation hanging in the air like a bad smell. They wanted me to pay for it. Of course they did. "No," I said simply. "I'm not paying for your vacation. I have plans for my money. I'm looking to rent a bigger studio for my business." Amy's face turned red. "Who cares about your stupid photo studio? I need this trip. Everyone's going. And I need to grow my business," I shot back. "If you want to go to Florida so badly, get a job and pay for it yourself." Mom gasped like I'd suggested Amy sell a kidney. Lily, how can you be so cruel and selfish? Your sister works hard at school. She deserves this trip. And I work hard every day to support this family, I said, my voice rising. I deserve to invest in my career. Amy started yelling that I was ruining her life. Dad shook his head in disappointment. Mom continued calling me selfish. I stood up, leaving my plate untouched. I'm done with this conversation, I said, and walked out as Amy's screams followed me up the stairs. For the next few days, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amy gave me the silent treatment, which was actually a blessing. Mom and Dad would barely grunt good morning before going back to ignoring me. I threw myself into work, visiting potential new studio spaces across the city. One was too dark, another too small, and a third had water damage in the corner. Finding the perfect space was proving harder than I thought. One night, about a week after our dinner confrontation, I came home around midnight after another disappointing studio viewing. The living room was dark, except for the blue glow of the TV where my parents were watching some late-night show. "Where's Amy?" I asked, noticing the unusual quiet. My parents exchanged a look. There was a pause that made my stomach tighten. "She flew to Florida with her friends this afternoon," Dad finally said, his tone deliberately casual. I frowned, confused. How did she afford that? Another pause, longer this time. Mom lifted her chin defiantly. "We sold your camera and gave her the money for the trip." The world stopped spinning for a second. "You what?" I bolted upstairs to my room, taking the steps two at a time. My camera was always stored in its case on my desk. Always. Except now. The desk was empty. The camera case was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore through my closet, checked under the bed, and rifled through my drawers. Nothing. My $3,500 professional camera, the tool I used to make my living, to support this ungrateful family, was gone. I stormed back downstairs, rage building with each step. "Are you out of your minds?" I shouted, not caring if the neighbors heard. "That camera is my livelihood. I use it to earn money, the same money that pays your mortgage." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Mom shrugged. "Well, if you had just given Amy the money for her trip in the first place, we wouldn't have had to sell it." I stared at them, dumbfounded by their logic. "So this is my fault? You stole from me and somehow I'm to blame." "Don't be so dramatic, Lily," Dad finally spoke. "It's just a camera. You can buy another one." Just a camera. The same camera I'd saved for months to buy. The same camera that had elevated the quality of my work and helped me land bigger clients. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and something inside me broke. These people weren't going to change. They would always put Amy first. They would always take what was mine and act like I owed it to them. Without another word, I went back to my room and pulled out my suitcases. I started throwing clothes in, not bothering to fold anything. I grabbed my toiletries from the bathroom, my laptop, and the external hard drives that contained years of my photography work. Mom appeared in my doorway. "What are you doing?" I didn't even look at her. "What does it look like?" "I'm leaving." "Lily, you're overreacting. I'm sure Amy will bring you back a nice souvenir from Florida." A souvenir, as if that would make up for stealing my professional equipment. I didn't bother responding. After I'd packed everything I could fit into my car, I carried the bags downstairs. Mom and Dad followed me, their expressions a mix of annoyance and disbelief, as if they couldn't understand why I was so upset. "You'll be back," Dad said as I loaded the last bag into my trunk. "This tantrum won't solve anything." I slammed the trunk shut and got into the driver's seat without saying goodbye. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing in the driveway, arms crossed, waiting for me to change my mind. I drove to my small photo studio downtown. It wasn't much, just a converted office space with good natural lighting, but it was mine. I had a small sofa in the corner that I sometimes napped on between shoots. Tonight, it would be my bed. Once I was alone, in the quiet of my studio, the reality of what had happened hit me like a tidal wave. I collapsed onto the sofa and sobbed, deep, painful sobs that racked my entire body. I cried from anger, from betrayal, and from the crushing realization that my own family valued me so little. When I had no tears left, I checked my bank account on my phone. I had about $15,000 in savings, money I'd been setting aside for a bigger, better studio space. Now that dream would have to wait. I needed to buy a new camera immediately or risk losing upcoming jobs. I also needed to find a place to live. In the morning, I called my friend Megan. Her parents owned a small apartment building near my studio, and she had mentioned recently that one of the units was vacant. "Of course you can have it," Megan said after I explained what happened. "My parents were going to list it next week, but it's yours if you want it. The rent is $1,200 a month." It was more than I wanted to spend, but I needed a place immediately. My next stop was Downtown Camera, the specialty store where I purchased my original equipment. The salesman recognized me. "Back so soon, Lily? Don't tell me something happened to your Canon." I forced a smile. "Long story. But I need the exact same model today, if possible." He whistled. "That's a $3,500 purchase. You sure about this?" "I don't have a choice. I have a wedding shoot this weekend." After buying the new camera, I drove to Megan's building and picked up the keys to my new apartment. It was small, a one-bedroom with a combined living/dining area and a kitchenette. But it was clean and bright, and most importantly, it was mine. I spent the rest of the day moving my things from the car and setting up the bare essentials. I'd need to buy a bed and some furniture, but that could wait. For now, an air mattress would do. Throughout the day, my phone kept lighting up with calls and texts from my parents. I finally looked at one of the messages. "You're being childish. Come home, and we can work this out. Mom's worried sick." Work this out? There was nothing to work out. They had stolen from me plain and simple. Another text from Dad. "This is what adults do, Lily. They help their family when needed. Grow up and take responsibility." The audacity was astounding. I was the only one in this family who had taken responsibility, paying their mortgage while they favored my sister. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I focused on settling into my new place and preparing for my upcoming shoots. I couldn't afford to lose any income now. That evening, an alert popped up on my phone. Amy had posted on Instagram. Against my better judgment, I opened it. There was my sister, posing on a white sand beach, margarita in hand, wearing designer sunglasses that probably cost what I was now paying in rent. The caption read, "Best vacation ever. Thanks Mom and Dad for making this trip possible." In that moment, something hardened inside me. I opened my banking app and navigated to the automatic payment section. With a few taps, I canceled the monthly mortgage payment to my parents' lender. Then I blocked all their numbers and Amy's. Let them figure out their own finances for once. I tossed my phone aside and lay back on my air mattress, staring at the ceiling of my new apartment. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone, but also strangely free. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of work and adjustment to my new life. I threw myself into photography, scheduling as many shoots as possible to keep my mind occupied. The new apartment still felt temporary, cardboard boxes stacked in corners, minimal furniture, bare walls. But it was mine. No one could sell my belongings here or make me feel guilty for not bankrolling their lives. I'd managed to avoid thinking about my family by keeping busy, but they weren't making it easy. After I blocked their numbers, they started calling from different phones. I had to answer every unknown number in case it was a potential client, which meant I'd occasionally hear, "We need to talk." I refused to engage. What was there to talk about? They'd made their choice and I'd made mine. One Tuesday morning, I was editing photos from a maternity shoot when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Lily Evans Photography." "Lily," it was my mother's voice, sharp and breathless. "What have you done?" "The bank called." Her voice shook with anger. They said our mortgage payment is late, that it was declined. Is that so? I replied evenly. You canceled the payments, didn't you? After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. Everything you've done for me? Like stealing my camera? Like constantly favoring Amy? Like making me feel worthless despite the fact that I've been supporting all of you. It was just a camera, she practically shouted into the phone. I never thought you'd be so vindictive over something so small. Holding a grudge against your own family. The camera was the last straw. I cut in, surprised by how calm I felt. I'm done being used. I'm done being the family ATM while being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. There was a pause. Then my mother's voice turned pleading. Lily, we can't afford the mortgage on our own. Your father's hours got cut back last month and with Amy's tuition. That's not my problem anymore, I said firmly. You chose Amy over me again. Now you can figure out how to support her without my help. I ended the call and blocked that number too. My hands were shaking, but I felt oddly liberated. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for myself, against my family. The next few days passed peacefully. I booked 3 new wedding clients and found a second-hand desk and chair for my apartment. I was slowly building my new life, piece by piece. Then one afternoon, while I was in the middle of a portrait session with a local businessman, the studio door burst open. I'm so sorry to interrupt, said my assistant Jenny, but there are people insisting on seeing you. They won't leave. Before I could respond, my parents and Amy pushed past Jenny into the studio. We need to talk right now, Dad barked, his face flushed red. The businessman looked alarmed. I apologized profusely and promised a discount on his photos, then asked Jenny to reschedule him for later that evening. After my client left, I turned to face my family. Amy stood slightly behind our parents, arms crossed, glaring at me. She was sporting a deep tan from her Florida trip, the trip that had cost me my camera and ultimately, my relationship with my family. You can't just barge into my workplace, I said, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the anger bubbling inside me. You left us no choice, Mom snapped. You blocked our numbers. You won't answer our messages. Because I have nothing to say to you. Dad stepped forward. Well, we have plenty to say to you, young lady. You need to restart those mortgage payments immediately. We've gotten an extension from the bank, but they won't wait forever. I stared at him in disbelief. Did you really just come to my place of business to demand money from me? It's not demanding, Mom said. It's your responsibility to help your family. My responsibility? I repeated. Was it Amy's responsibility to decline a vacation paid for with stolen property? Was it your responsibility to, I don't know, not steal from your daughter? Amy finally spoke up. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a stupid camera. That stupid camera was how I made my living, I shot back, including paying for the roof over your ungrateful head. Dad's face darkened. That's enough. I won't be spoken to this way by my own daughter. You will restart those payments or what? I challenged. Or we'll tell everyone what you've done, Mom said. Your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, everyone will know how you abandoned your family when we needed you. Go ahead, I said, surprised by my own courage. Tell them I stopped financially supporting my family after you stole my professional equipment to fund a beach vacation for my spoiled sister. In fact, if you don't leave my studio right now and stop harassing me, I'll file a police report for the theft of my camera. The color drained from my father's face. You wouldn't. Try me. I pulled out my phone. It was worth over $3,000, which makes it grand theft in this state. I wonder how Amy's fancy college would feel about her being involved in a theft case. My parents stood frozen, the reality of their actions finally sinking in. They had never faced consequences before, not from me anyway. You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police, I said, holding up my phone. They shuffled backward toward the door, Mom pulling Amy along by the arm. This isn't over, Dad muttered. It is for me, I replied. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the confrontation in my studio, wondering if I had gone too far. But then I remembered how they had invaded my workplace, threatened me, and shown absolutely no remorse for stealing my camera. I remembered Amy's Instagram post, my mother's dismissive, "just a camera" comment, and all the years of being treated as less important than my sister. The guilt evaporated. They had made their choices. Now they could live with the consequences. 3 months passed since that confrontation in my studio. Autumn had arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and brilliant foliage that made for stunning outdoor photography sessions. My business continued to thrive despite the personal turmoil. In fact, without the constant drain of supporting my family, I'd been able to save more aggressively. I hadn't heard directly. I hadn't heard from my parents or Amy since that day. They'd finally stopped trying to contact me after my threat to involve the police. The silence was both a relief and, occasionally, a hollow ache in quiet moments when I'd remember birthdays celebrated around our dining table or rare, peaceful evenings watching movies together. But those moments of nostalgia were brief. The reality of how they treated me always pushed through, reminding me that I'd made the right choice in cutting ties. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, I was at a local coffee shop reviewing client photos when someone slid into the chair across from me. I looked up, startled to see my cousin Rachel. "Don't worry. I come in peace," she said, holding up her hands. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." Rachel and I had always been close growing up, but she was also tight with Amy. I hadn't spoken to her since moving out. "I'm good," I replied cautiously. "How did you find me?" "Small town. People talk." She glanced at my laptop screen. "Business seems good." I nodded, waiting for the real reason behind her visit. Rachel fidgeted with a sugar packet. "Look, I heard what happened with the camera. That was messed up, what they did to you." This surprised me. "Who told you?" "My parents." "No way." Rachel shook her head. "They've been telling everyone you abandoned them over a disagreement about family finances. It was Amy who cracked. She felt guilty once she found out they sold your camera." I processed this information silently. At least Amy had some conscience, however belated. "Anyway," Rachel continued, "things aren't great at your parents' house. Amy took a sabbatical from college and is working at the mall to help with bills. Your parents are both picking up extra shifts. The mortgage situation hit them hard." I waited for the guilt to flood in, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sense of justice. They were finally experiencing the consequences of their actions and learning what responsibility actually meant. "I'm sorry it came to that," I said finally, "but they made their choice." Rachel gave a slow nod. "My purpose is not to persuade you to assist them. In fact, I wanted to let you know that I believe you made the proper decision. They exploited you for many years." Her assistance was unexpected but appreciated. The following hour was spent catching up, being cautious not to bring up my parents again. Rachel told me she wanted me to take pictures of her engagement next spring before she left. I appreciated her demonstrating unity in this way. I considered what Rachel had said after she had gone. It was hard to reconcile the idea of Amy working retail and my parents working overtime with the entitled family that had insisted that I pay for their way of life. Maybe they would learn something important from this adversity. I leased a new, bigger photography studio downtown 2 weeks later. High ceilings, ideal natural lighting, and a little loft area that could be used as a client changing room were all features of the room. Although the cost was almost double what I had previously paid for my studio, my expanding clientele made it worthwhile. As I was setting up my gear in the new location on the day of the move, I got a text from an unidentified number. It was a picture of my former bedroom, which has been totally converted into a home office. "Sold the house," was the message. Cutting back to a flat. "I figured you ought to be aware." I could identify my father's writing style, concise, factual, and emotionless. I saved the message but didn't reply. It signified the end of that phase of my life. I gave myself permission to really enjoy my freedom that evening while seated on the floor of my new studio with takeaway containers and a bottle of champagne. Despite the difficulties along the way, I had come out stronger. I was beginning to feel at home in my flat. I had added personal touches, including a cozy reading nook by the largest window, plants on each window ledge, and framed reproductions of my favorite photos. I was designing an environment that only represented my wants and preferences for the first time. I was also seeing steady growth in my savings account. My idea of one day buying my own home was no longer just a pipe dream, it was now a realistic objective. I had begun looking at programs for first-time homebuyers and allocating a certain percentage of every payment for a down payment. Looking around my new studio and sipping champagne, I thought about all that had transpired. My parents had always advised me that I needed something steady and reliable for a job, and that photography wasn't one of them. They found it difficult to adapt to life without my financial assistance, yet here I was, living my life as I saw fit. I didn't mean any harm to them. They were still my family in spite of everything, and I would always have some affection for them. However, I didn't regret establishing limits and expecting deference. Love sometimes entails allowing others to suffer the repercussions of their deeds. Maybe we can get back in touch on more equal terms eventually. Maybe not. In any case, I was content with my choice. My new studio was bathed in golden light as the sun started to set. I grabbed my camera, which was a substitute for the one they had sold, and took a picture. The final picture had warm light, deep shadows, and limitless potential. I made the decision to frame it and display it in my studio as a memento of my progress. Now, here was my narrative, told the way I wanted it to be. The future was as wide and promising as an unexposed frame, and it stretched out in front of me.